awesome to be here. Awesome to see all of you. Laura, thanks for joining.
I'm excited to be here. Good to see everyone.
So, in the car ride up, we carpooled here. We were talking about, I was trying to remember, when did we first meet? And we first became investors in 2017, so it's been a little over 5 years. But we met in 2015. And so I actually don't have as great of a memory. I remember a little bit about that first meeting in those days, but I'm curious what you remember.
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to 2015. I think back then we were a company of maybe 20-something people. We had an office in the middle of Soma, actually right above Y Combinator. And I remember getting an email from Talia, right after we raised our last financing, that was a Series A, getting an email from Talia saying that she's been looking into Shippo and she'd like to meet up. And at that point in time, we're way too early for raising a Series B. But it looked like Talia had done a bunch of work on the company. So yeah, we decided to meet up. She came to our office, and very soon after the Series A, Bessemer then preempted our Series B, and that was how we met. I had met Jeremy, her partner, I think while raising our Series A. He was or is on the Shopify board, so there were some connections there, and I felt like Bessemer, Talia, and Jeremy just really knew the SMB business and knew e-commerce and SMB merchants through their involvement in Shopify and Yelp and a few other companies.
That's great. Well, I love that it was an outbound email to you, and it's very fitting because I swear by thoughtful, cold emails and outbound emails, and you got nothing to lose and only things to gain, and we gained a lot through that one, so that's awesome. So 2015, let's go back even a little earlier to 2014.
Yep.
Which is around the time, Shippo was founded in 2013, but then really became Shippo in the current form, a little bit later. I think starting as an e-commerce company itself, but then figuring out, hey, we can actually enable other e-commerce businesses to make it much easier for them to do their jobs. So tell me, in that time in 2014, what does a day in the life of Laura look like as CEO? How did you spend your time? Walk us through what that looked like and how you built an early stage company.
Yeah, I want to give a little bit of context about the founding story first. So I'm originally from Germany. I have a co-founder called Simon. He's German as well. We met in school, and we came to San Francisco first for different reasons. I joined a YC startup as a summer intern, and then Simon was here trying to fund or get funding for another startup. When that did not work out, the two of us started building an e-commerce business, and that was really we were trying to experiment or trying to find different kinds of ideas to work on and couldn't really come up with anything big or disruptive. So we decided to just get started building an online store. And that online store then got us to our current business, which is we're building a shipping platform for e-commerce businesses, the global shipping layer of the internet. And we encountered that idea because we had to ship for our own online store. So that's how we stumbled into that problem. And I think a typical day, 2013, we were building our e-commerce business. 2014, we realized that shipping is actually a real pain point in e-commerce and is something that every single e-commerce business needs to figure out. It's really difficult and complex to figure out. You've got the likes of Amazon setting really high expectations for what shipping should look like, and that was a problem that we wanted to solve. And then what our day looked like, I think in 2014, it was the two of us and maybe one or two part-time people working with us. We had kind of split up the job that Simon was more on the product and edge side of things, and I was on the go-to-market side of things. And go-to-market at that point in time really meant everything from customer support, responding to customer emails, to figuring out how to get listed on the Shopify app store, to writing blog posts. So everything everything you can imagine on the go-to-market side. Like I did that myself. And I think the most valuable part there was just like talking to customers every single day. Like because I was the one responding to customer emails and support requests. Like I was in like constant touch with customers about what they wanted, what they needed. I was also the one telling customers that we're an SMB ourselves, like we're just getting started, like feedback is really appreciated, customer reviews are really appreciated, just like having a direct relationship there with the customer. And that's, I guess, like something I'm missing the most at this point. Like right now, a typical day is much more about like, I'm managing a bunch of executives who are then managing their own team members to work on like their specific functions. So we've become much more specialized over the course of the last like 8-9 years, where like I was doing everything at the like myself, to we now have a bunch of like specialized team doing a bunch of specialized functions in the company, and I'm overseeing the go-to-market side of things there.
So early on, it's you, it's Simon, it's a few part-time people, and then talk, like how did you get your first hire? Who was the first full-time hire?
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that? Maybe talk through like some of the hiring challenges and just tactics that you used to get the first few people on board and what you learned.
Yeah, so because the two of us are from Germany, we didn't really have a network here in San Francisco. So I know that a lot of people make like very successful early hires by looking at who they went to school with. And that was something that was like hard for us because most people we went to school with did not have a work permit to come to the US and work on something here. Our first few hires were extremely random. Like there were a bunch of like hiring marketplaces back then, like AngelList is still around, but there were a few others too where we listed our jobs and like started looking for people, like especially, like we're back then especially looking for engineers, just like looking for people who would be like culturally a fit. And I think if I think back about some of the hiring mistakes, like maybe not the earliest hires, but like over time when we started building out our teams, I think like one of the things that we did well early on was like hiring generalists, and it got much harder when we started hiring specialists to figure out like, are these people actually good at their jobs? Like we ended up hiring like our first few early execs, we ended up hiring people from like large companies such as Facebook and Google. And we're pretty impressed by like, we're able to attract talent who like used to work at Facebook and Google. And then realized pretty soon that like this kind of talent is probably not the right fit for a team at like 8 people, 10 people, something like that. And I think that was an interesting, just learning opportunity. We still have a few people in the company who joined super early on. Like we have someone who's been with us like since year 1, actually 2 people who've been with us since year 1, and they've really scaled with the company. But a lot of people have left and like are at early stage startups now again.
It's such a great lesson because I see the temptation to hire people that have these like great credentials or have worked at companies like Google and Facebook, and by the way, there's just like a lot of people with that background because those are big companies. Figuring out who is actually really able to get their hands dirty, and be in the weeds and work in a startup environment and culture is just so different, and so it's hard to translate the experience. When you're hiring specialists, like the first few specialists, and it's such an interesting challenge because you don't necessarily have, you're looking for someone that has skills that you don't have, and you may not even know how to assess as well. How do you do that? So maybe let's take like a specific example of someone in a marketing or a sales role or a technical role you pick. Talk us through like how do you actually do that and assess who's really qualified?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think the way I did it back then and the way I do it now is still very similar. So it starts with like, I reach out to a few companies that are a little bit ahead of us. So like right now it would be companies that are, you know, like maybe a little bit more global than we are. Back then it would be like companies that have raised a Series A. And then like ask their founders to meet their head of marketing and like be super upfront that I'm not trying to poach them, I'm just trying to meet like the best head of marketings out there to like get some kind of pattern recognition, to know what awesome looks like. And then do that with like a handful of people and ask them as well, like what makes them great at their job, like what are some of the KPIs that they're using to measure their success, what does their team look like, and really just develop that sort of pattern recognition of like, this is how people think about, like this is how they think about doing their job, and this is how they think about, you know, being successful at their job. And then after that, like when I start meeting my own candidates, like trying to look for those kinds of patterns becomes a little bit easier. But yeah, I still do the same as I'm recruiting for execs right now, like just talking to people who are not candidates and probably will not be candidates in this round, but who have done the same thing and are a little bit further along than we are.
I love that. It's much easier to benchmark if you have a sense for what great really looks like. And sometimes, like if you're just looking at what's right in front of you or comes through the pipeline, like it's much harder to assess who's really great and what's just okay.
Yep.
Are there any interview questions or things that you've figured out over the years that help you to identify who is going to be a really strong fit generally, or maybe specifically in certain areas and roles? I know some people have go-to interview questions. I'm trying to hone this myself. Assessing people and talents is, I think, one of the hardest things, but also one of the most important parts of the job, both for investors and for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you've learned.
Yeah, so I don't have like this go-to interview question, but I think what I'm always trying to figure out is like when a candidate is talking me through what they've done in their previous jobs, just how much of it that they do themselves. Like it's easy to say like the team has achieved something or the company has achieved something, but let's say you're hiring a sales leader and they're talking about beating their quota, like what have they specifically done themselves every day to reach that quota, and really getting into the detail there. And getting to something as specific as possible, because many times you meet people who are, you know, like it looks great on paper and the high level things that they're saying sound great, but it's hard to tell like how much of this did they drive versus they were just along for the ride. Because the team was successful or the company was a rocket ship or because the macro environment was so good.
One of the things that I've started to see is that really talented people, they're able to identify, like, they'll show you, this is what like they've built, they're actually doing things, getting things done. But they're also deeply unsatisfied oftentimes with like everything they've done, even if it's pretty great. And I actually think you're very much like that. Like something awesome will happen and Laura's like, yeah, but like all of this over here is really bad, and like this isn't like actually good. And it's actually a quality that I think I often see in really talented people, is that they're raising their own bar quite a bit, as opposed to just saying, like, oh, look at all these amazing things I did, like I really crushed it.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what I did, and I could have done 10x better.
An interesting like question about that is, and something you can ask in an interview is like, how do you know whether or not you're successful? And I think like then you get to whether or not that person is intrinsically motivated. I think people who are intrinsically motivated, they'll tell you they just know. Like they know whether or not they've been successful. And people who are extrinsically motivated, they'll say like I don't know, like there's a celebration, or like my boss told me this was awesome. And there's no right or wrong whether or not you want someone who's intrinsically or extrinsically motivated, but at least like understanding where motivation comes from, I think is really interesting to know for the people you bring on board.
Yeah, I have a friend who, in his company, he asks people just straight up, like, how ambitious are you? And it's really interesting. I think it takes people off guard, but it's interesting just to hear the answers and how people respond to that. Okay, so I want to shift gears to fundraising.
Yep.
In 2020, 2021, we were in this like super exuberant period where capital was flowing really freely, but we're kind of back to, I talk about it with my portfolio companies and others, like we're back to normal. It's not like this is necessarily down to some devastating level by any means, but if you look historically and we look back to like when Shippo was getting started in 2013, The fundraising environment and ecosystem is not all that different from what it was back then to what it looks like today.
Yeah.
Can you talk through just like how you thought about fundraising at the earliest stages, maybe the seed round specifically, how you went about it, and what you learned through that process?
Yep. So I love that you said earlier that you like a good outbound email, like a outbound cold email. And that was how we raised our seed round as well. So yeah, we came here without much of a network and didn't know a ton of investors. But I think it's really really easy to identify investors. Like you've got these lists on the internet, you can look into like what people are investing in, and then start crafting like really good and personalized like outbound cold emails. I send a whole lot of these like outbound cold emails, and if you do them well, like I think it's like actually very possible to get to a meeting. When I say do them well, I mean like you have to look into which partner at that firm is like interested in what you're building. Do they have portfolio companies that are competitive with you? If they have, then it's probably not a good firm to reach out to. And then really like write a personalized email where the recipient can tell that you've spent time like thinking about what it is that they're interested in, and you're not just like blasting everyone with the same email. So we did that early on and like got a good amount of meetings through that. And I think there was like, for my seed round, we pitched like.
How big was your seed round, just for context?
Seed round was 7.5 million.
That's a big seed.
No, wait, sorry, that was our Series A. It was 2.5. It was 2.5.
It's like, you know.
No, 2.5 million, and then Series A was 7.5.
Okay, so $2.5 million seed round.
Yep, and it ended up being led by what's now called Uncork Capital and Version 1 Ventures, but we pitched more than 100 different VCs in order to get to that round.
100 pitches?
Yes, I had a spreadsheet, and I think like being super organized with fundraising is I think a really, really important part, just like having a spreadsheet, figuring out the right timeline, having all of your materials ready, like a fundraising deck, maybe a little bit of due diligence materials. In a seed stage round, probably not as important, but then going like very systematic around like this week you're sending out all of your emails, and next week you're starting to take like the first meetings, and then the week after you're expecting to do like second meetings, and then the third week maybe like, I don't know, partner meetings, and then you go into due diligence afterwards, and having like a very systematic approach to this, a clear timeline, so that you can drive like multiple firms to the same outcome at the same time, to ideally have some kind of competitive dynamic going on where you can actually tell an investor that there are other people looking at the same round and they're roughly in the same stages, and investors know that they don't have forever to figure this out. Yeah, but we pitched 100 different people. We ended up raising from like I think 7 or 8 investors, and it was a $2.5 million round.
How long roughly did that process take?
I think in later stages, when I got better at fundraising, it was a quick process of like 2 months. The first time we raised, it was a 3-month process. And yes, I think we could have done it faster if we were more systematic about it. But it took more than 3 months.
Okay, that's a good data point. And then you had Uncork and Version 1 as the leads, but 7 or 8 other investors. How did you think about the construct of the round, and anything that you'd advise early stage founders as they think through, hey, like I might be able to bring on an angel, like should you take that capital now? Should you hold out and wait to get a larger round together?
Yes.
How did you think about that in those trade-offs?
I think it's really hard to get investors on board when you have nothing in the round committed. So what we did early on was we took a bunch of angel checks. We got to maybe 250K or something, and then you can start saying that you have, I don't know, you're raising $1 million round and you have 250K committed already. And I think it's better to anchor the round lower. Like we knew we wanted to raise more than a million, but we set like 250 out of $1 million to just create some sense of urgency. And then at that point in time, we started like talking to like larger funds, more institutional investors, and it wasn't really a strategy. This is just what happened. But in hindsight, I'm really glad that we didn't end up with a party round, but had a few larger checks in the company early on with people who are really committed, like to help us out and also help us with follow-on financing, and yeah, and just make sure that the company was successful.
That's great. I know we have to wrap up in 1 minute. One thing you said that I just want to reiterate that I thought is really great is showing that momentum and the committed capital. Some investors, not Bessemer, you know, are somewhat FOMO operated, and I think having this kind of trigger and showing that momentum, even in a small way, can be really helpful. And second is the notion of starting small, and then letting the round size go up. I think that's advice that holds true through every round of financing, and that we tell founders consistently across stages. Okay, but before we wrap up, Shippo, what can the audience do to get started on Shippo? You know, Shippo today is doing processing, you know, well over $1 billion of shipping volume. And a lot of their customers are early stage startups and companies that are just getting started. What can you offer the audience?
A quick plug is just that we do have startup credits. So for anyone who is running an e-commerce business or a platform, a marketplace, or doing anything where you need to ship, I think we have $10,000 in startup credits for any startup getting started on Shippo.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.